Okay, a couple of weeks back, I did a video, the 5 gifts, talking about the 5 gifts that the Philippines gives me that I can give to my family. 5 aspects of living here, 5 things, 5 benefits that I have from living in the Philippines that I can give my family that we would not have had we stayed in Texas. Texas is a wonderful place. The Philippines is a place with a lot of problems, okay? A lot of problems, especially during this crazy COVID quarantine restrictions that they have. We're not really affected by that where we're living, but we see a lot of people affected by that. There's a lot of pollution in the Philippines. There are a lot of people that are very cruel to dogs and keep them in cages all the time. Hard to get used to things like that. But these negative things aside, the benefits far outweigh the negatives here in the Philippines. And we've chosen, my wife and I stayed over a year in the Philippines before we decided to stay and raise our kids here. We were completely set to go back to the U.S. and we decided to stay here. And this is why. This is part of the reason why. That list of 5 gifts that the Philippines gives to me that I can give to my family has expanded. After discussions with my wife and with our friends, it's clear that there are many more benefits to living in the Philippines. Many more gifts that the Philippines gives to me that I can provide my family that we would not have had we stayed in Texas. Okay, there are problems in the Philippines. There, you can write up a list, of pros and cons. There's definitely a cons column. There are definitely problems with staying here, and there are definitely benefits to living in Texas, for sure. But for us, these things were really important. And so I thought I'd do a video and share these with you. Okay, there are 2 items here that I'm going to include at the beginning that I did not include in my previous video, okay? One is time. Time. Amazing. Okay, if we stayed in the U.S., I'd have to work. I don't have to work a lot. I could have a 20-hour-a-week job at a retail store that I had. That would give me $1,000 extra every month. It'd be more than enough to cover the cost of health insurance and then provide us a little extra spending money also, okay? Maybe pay for the car payment, the car insurance, the gas for the car, things like that. But it's important to note that there's going to be a lot of time that I'm going to be away from the family if we stayed in the U.S. Time. I don't need to work for us to stay in the Philippines. So I'm around my wife and the kids 24/7. Now that would drive a lot of guys nuts. And I know a lot of people, great guys, who just need some time away from the family once in a while. And I totally understand that, Maybe that's why I go back to the U.S. every year, Maybe that's my 10-day break, all right, once in a while. But it's nice having that option of staying with the family. If you knew how long and how hard I struggled to have a family, I wanted kids early on, and I just was unable to find somebody to have kids with. It's really difficult to find a good, solid marriage in the U.S. It's difficult. Time is what is the big thing. When my wife found the video of the 5 gifts, that was one thing she pointed out right away, time. The second item is food quality. Now this is a biggie, okay? And I hadn't really thought about this. In the U.S., we were living in Brownsville, Texas. Brownsville is the home of the largest shrimp fleet in the U.S. So you can drive past the port of Brownsville and you'll see just lines of shrimp boats. Just dozens, maybe hundreds of shrimp boats that go out into the Gulf of Mexico and get shrimp. Now, when I first moved to Texas in the early 90s, you used to be able to buy shrimp from these boats, fresh. And then I was a public school teacher at the time. You'd just ask your kids, and somebody will bring you fresh shrimp from the boat. Because somebody is going to know somebody who has a family member that works on the boat. And they're going to bring home fresh shrimp and share it with their family and friends. So you're going to be able to get fresh shrimp. But now, after maybe 2010, my wife arrived in Texas in 2015. I don't know where I can find that anymore. So the shrimp that you buy in Texas now at the grocery store is from a farm, from a shrimp farm. Or it comes frozen from China, and God knows what's happened to it, okay? So the shrimp, when you eat it, it tastes, I can say this now because I've lived in the Philippines for almost 3 years now. And I've gone back to Texas, I don't know, 5 times. So I can say I've experienced both. The shrimp in Texas tastes like shrimp-flavored sponge. That's what it tastes like. You're eating a dish sponge cut in the shape of a shrimp with shrimp flavoring added. That's what it's like. When you arrive in the Philippines and you're eating shrimp here, it's amazing. It's very, very different. Very different. Much, much better. I made French toast for my wife, okay? And the eggs are from a farm right around the corner from our subdivision. They're not pasteurized or anything. They're fresh from the chicken, okay? You can tell by looking at it that these are not factory eggs. These are fresh eggs from a farm, okay? I make French toast, okay? The bread has no chemicals in it. It's just, the basic ingredients. It will mold in 3 days, maybe 5 days. Now, I remember bread doing that when I was a kid. But now in the U.S., bread doesn't really do that. It takes weeks for the bread to mold because of all the chemicals they put in the bread. Here, the bread doesn't have that. So I'm making French toast with fresh eggs, okay, fresh bakery bread, and cinnamon that just tastes different. It's alive. The cinnamon is alive compared to the cinnamon in the U.S. that's been in a jar that's been packaged for years before somebody buys it and opens it. Okay, the cinnamon here is very different. And I'm tasting this French toast, and it's amazing. It's like I've never tasted anything in my life before. And everything is like that here. One drawback is steak, because beef steak, if you buy it, is very tough, very difficult to chew. Now, I remember steak being like that when I was a kid in the 1970s. And sure enough, it's because steak here comes from grass-fed, free-range cattle in Australia. And there's some beef here also. But it's not raised in a box, completely immobilized and pumped full of all kinds of chemicals and hormones to fatten up quickly. And so it's filled with fat and drugs. There was a friend of mine in Texas that used to tease me because I always talked about how bad the beef was there. I never wanted to eat beef in Texas, only in rare circumstances. And he always teased me about it. And so I pull out this clipping. I don't have it anymore. But it was a clipping from the Chicago Tribune, and it talked about how hospitals in Chicago had to remove beef from their cafeteria, from the menu, because patients that were eating beef were getting so many antibiotics, it was interfering with their medicine. So the patients in the hospital could not be served beef because it was giving them a dose of antibiotics that was interfering with their drugs that the pharmacist couldn't figure out. So they just had to remove beef from the whole menu. So this is real, and in the U.S., meat is like that. It's either packaged and frozen coming from China, or it's questionable. You don't know what you're eating. So I ate a lot of organic, like pizzas, stuff like that, veggie pizzas that were frozen. I ate a lot of frozen food in Texas. And that was difficult for my wife to experience. She finally found a farmer's market that she liked. But here in the Philippines, the food is just different. Fresh fish, fresh fruits, fresh pork, and chicken. The beef here is difficult to eat because it's all free range grass-fed cattle. Amazing quality of food. I don't think I've eaten anything frozen since we arrived here 3 years ago. Nothing. I've eaten almost nothing out of a can. Amazing. Number 3 is standard of living. Okay, and this was discussed in my previous video at length. In 2008, perhaps 2010, I met a guy when I was on a flight back from Manila. He was from Houston. He's also flying to Houston, as I was. And so we shared a plane. So I got to know this guy. I got to talk to him for a couple of hours. He'd married a Filipina, and they were living in Houston for a couple of years. And she's pregnant with their baby, and he just can't sleep at nights. And he finally confesses to her that he's really having doubts that they should raise the kid in the U.S. And he's nervous about telling her this because she starts to cry. And he's thinking that she's crying because she thinks that he wants to send her back, that I've only been married a couple of years, you're going to send me back to the Philippines. The marriage is falling apart. But in reality, she's crying because that was her prayer, was to go back to the Philippines to raise their kid. Because in the U.S., everybody's alone, everybody's isolated. You can't trust family members. And in the Philippines, it's the exact opposite. You rely on family members. And so there's a whole network of people to help you with everything. So they discussed it, and he decided to raise his kids in the Philippines. So he got a small apartment that he shared with a guy, and he just sends money to the Philippines to support his wife and kid. And then whenever he gets a vacation, he goes to visit. And sure enough, 9 months later, another kid is born, So he's got this big family now in the Philippines that he's supporting. He's going to be eligible for retirement in another 5 or 6 years, so he's probably already living in the Philippines with full-time with his family and his pension. And in the U.S., an apartment and public school, you take the same money in the Philippines, and you're going to have a really nice house in a private subdivision with armed security guards patrolling, totally crime-free, and you send your kid to really elite private schools, and it really doesn't cost that much. Our budget here in the Philippines is about $80,000 a month, 80,000 pesos a month. That's like $1,600. Our budget in the U.S. is a lot more. So we're supporting a household of 7 people here. It's really nice, Our standard of living is going way up. So in the U.S., we're kind of struggling. I'm going to be working here. I'm home all the time. We're not struggling. We're saving money every month. We just can't spend all of it. We have a much bigger house in a completely crime-free neighborhood. I'm taking my kid to Starbucks, to Kidzuna all the time. Everybody knows my kid's name. Krispy Kreme. It's amazing, okay? So number 1, time. Number 2, food quality. Number 3, standard of living, housing, Starbucks, Kidzuna. Schools. Number 4, private schools instead of public. Now with COVID, the schools are closed. So you have to have online classes. Well, little kids can't have online classes. My kid vomits if he has more than 3 hours of the iPad every day. It's damaging to the brain of young children to spend too much time on a computer. it's damaging to watch too much TV. There's plenty of research about it. So you can't have online classes for young kids. So what do? Well, you just wait for the schools to open. And in the meantime, I found out that, money goes a long way here in the Philippines. And you can hire a teacher, a professional teacher, to open up her classroom to private tutoring. So I hire this teacher who twice a week tutors my kid in her classroom. Amazing. How much is that going to cost in the U.S.? For you to do that, how much is that going to cost? It's prohibitive. You can't do things like that in the U.S. Here I can do it. So my kid goes to school. He goes to the classroom. He's getting used to the classroom environment. He's 4. So this is pre-K. Next year will be kinder. He's learning all the discipline of school. It's amazing. Amazing. We wouldn't be able to do this in the U.S. In the U.S., of course, schools are open already, but it's amazing here. The quality of school is much better. One-on-one teacher-student ratio. You can't beat that. Number 5, okay, this is a biggie, and I went on for a while, and this video is getting long already, so I'm going to have to cut this short. But number 5 is medical care, okay? So my kid fell and cut his head. Our whole house is concrete, solid concrete. You can't pound a nail in the wall anywhere. Our house is like a bunker, a bomb shelter. Amazing. So he fell, he cut his head, and he needed 2 stitches. So we got some x-rays, we got some focused private attention at the emergency room. The emergency room's about a 10-minute drive, maybe 15 minutes from our house. We're gone a total of 3 hours, okay? So we left our house, we went to the emergency room, we got focused attention, we tried to get a CT scan, but my kid freaked out when he started to be moved. The machine started to move him into the tunnel, So no CT scan. So we just settled for 3 x-rays of his head. There's no damage to his brain. He's in good shape. Gets the stitches, some pain medication, comes home. The total bill was about 6,000 pesos, so about $118 total. Now, our insurance in the U.S. was $417. So we just spent $111, something like that, $118 cash with no insurance at the emergency room. Amazing. I didn't need to go to an ATM. I had enough cash on me and some extra cash I had in the car in the parking lot that I got, that I paid the bill with money on me. When have you ever done that in the U.S.? And no waiting. We got attention right away. Amazing. I had 2 experiences with my dad when he was dying of cancer. He wanted to go to the emergency room. He had Blue Cross medical insurance and Medicare, government-supplied medical insurance. And he was never able to see a nurse. He was never able to see a doctor. Told by this clerk waiting behind this window to keep waiting. Just wait your turn. Wait your turn, sir. And after 3 hours, my dad said, I'm tired, I want to go home. And we left, and we never saw a nurse, never saw a doctor. That happened twice with my dad. I never went to see American dentists because I don't trust them. I got shabby care from American dentists. I got bad advice from American dentists. They wanted to take out my wisdom teeth that ended up growing in fine. So I always went to Mexico for dental care, and I always had excellent medical care in Mexico and paid almost nothing for it. I could go on and on about U.S. medical care and problems I've had with it, but there's none of it here in the Philippines. You get very focused attention very quickly. You pay cash, and it's golden. They love you. There's no need for a car in the Philippines. It's nice to have a car. I have a car. But you don't need one. If your car's in the shop, you can get around. You can go to the store. There's jeepneys, there's trikes. you can hire, and it costs almost nothing. It costs, if I get a tricycle that's a motorcycle with a sidecar, it's like a taxi. If I ride that to the mall, it's 60 pesos. It's $1. Okay, $1.20, something like that. If I take a jeepney, it's like 11 pesos. It's like maybe 25 cents to ride to the mall. That's it. So you don't really need a car. It's nice to have. You don't need it. It's a huge benefit. In the U.S., you just can't get around without a car. Number 7 in a list that's rapidly expanding is family. My wife's family's here. When we moved to the Philippines, we transferred about 1,000,000 pesos. That's like maybe $20,000 from our savings to my wife's sister's bank because my wife's bank account wasn't active anymore. So we didn't have a bank account to transfer to. So we just asked her, can we transfer $20,000 to your bank account? Sure. We arrived months later, and she just gave us all the money. None of it was missing. I can't tell you how much that shocked me. I just, amazing. I can't do that in the U.S. You can't do that in the U.S. There's some families that can do that in the U.S. Not my family, okay? I'm totally, this is new to me. When my family visits my house in the U.S., when they leave, the first thing you do is you take a deep sigh, and you're going to walk around the house, and you're going to check to see what they stole, because they're going to steal stuff. You're going to have to be careful with your credit card. You can't leave money out. They're going to take it. Okay. There's certain family members, this was really difficult for me to explain to my wife when she arrived in 2015, that if my family shows up at the house, not only can you not let them in, you might have to call the police. You might really have to call the police. Don't let them in. It's difficult for her to understand, okay? But here in the Philippines, my goodness, it's wonderful. It's amazing. For a while, we had, for over a week, we had 14 people in our house. There was my 2 kids, age 4 and age 2. There was an 8-year-old girl, okay? And then we had a group of teenagers, okay? We had a 17, 18-year-old boy and girl, 17, 18, and 20-year-old boy, girl. That's 8. My wife and I is 9 and 10. My wife's brother lives with us. My wife's sister lives with us, 11 and 12. And then my wife's 2 older brothers were staying with us, 13, 14. Amazing. Great time. No fighting, no violence. Nothing was stolen. Amazing. I could leave money laying out and it's not going to be taken. Just blew my mind. You just don't have that in the U.S., not with my family. So this is wonderful for me, this extended family. My kids love their cousins. There's so many cousins, I don't even know. In the U.S., I don't know. I've never met them. Okay, and number 8, the last one I wanted to finish with, is space. And that's what started this list, is space. That was the first one on my first video, okay, the 5 gifts. But this has now become 8 gifts. And there's more. There's more. But space is a big one. And I wanted to talk about that because during the COVID quarantine, my wife and I are living with our 2 kids, okay? At the time when the quarantine first started, we had a professional nanny that stayed with us. And then my wife's brother would come and stay with us for a while, and then he'd go back to her sister's house and kind of bounce back and forth. She has a sister that's an RN that works in a hospital, but because of COVID, she was stuck at the hospital because the hospitals were full. So she'd be gone for sometimes a week at a time, so she didn't really count. But officially there were 7 people staying here, but for a time it was more like 6. But I was walking with my wife, okay, and our two boys are just running around the subdivision. The subdivision's mostly empty. One house and then maybe 5 empty lots and then another house. So there's all this empty space. There's all these flowers, bougainvillea and jacaranda trees and all this beauty around us all the time. There's goats, there's chickens, there's dogs and cats. There's a lot of birds, songbirds, butterflies. Amazing place to live. And so much green all the time. All the time. Giant mango trees, coconut trees, fruit trees. The kids running in the sun, laughing. Flowers, butterflies, songbirds. Amazing. Sunlight. And I'm walking with my wife and watching the kids run, and I'm not worried about it. I'm not worried if they run around the corner. There's no traffic. There's none. It's a subdivision. People have to pass through the gate with armed guards to get here. Nobody's going to drive through, especially our area is kind of a cul-de-sac. It's amazing. And I told my wife, we can't give our kids this in the U.S. We can't. We lived in a quiet subdivision, and we had a little bit of this, maybe about half, maybe a little less, a third as big space. But most everybody worked during the day, and so the streets were pretty empty. There's no security guards or anything. But it was nice, in the U.S., and we took advantage of that. But of course, I had to work in the U.S., we didn't have the family staying with us. It was just us. And of course, the stress levels are a lot higher. You don't sleep as well when you're worried about stress. In the U.S., we had one bill one time. I don't know how many bills we had. 7 bills every month. But one bill was for our cable, and Wi-Fi was the same bill. And I had that company since the 1990s. I'd always had cable TV. I liked it. The same company. I'd been with them for 20 years. And I'd never missed a payment. Well, my wife and I missed a payment. After she'd arrived, for some reason I thought she'd paid it. She thought I paid it. You just pay online, And they started sending us all these terrible notices, And so I was horrified. So I took one of the notices and went straight to their office and paid it off. And I had to pay September and October both. And then I had to pay a late fee also. And it ended up being a total of $400 for one bill. Now, here in the Philippines, when I load my phone up for internet, it costs me 90 pesos for a week. That's about $1.60, something like that. Less than $2 for a week, and that's 8 gigs on my cell phone. And then I can use the cell phone as a hotspot. Now, we ended up getting Wi-Fi anyway for the house. So, it's more than that, actually. But for a long time, that's all we had was just our cell phones. Now, my wife's is a little bit more. She has a different cell phone company, and hers is a little bit more expensive. But that's a good barometer for you to see what the life here is like. 90 pesos each week, less than $2, less than $10 a month total, versus $400 a month for Wi-Fi and cable TV. But here we don't have cable TV. Well, this video is 30 minutes. I doubt it's going to get any views, but I hope I educated you a little bit on what our life's like here in the Philippines. All the time I'm shaking my head thinking, man, I'm glad I'm here. I'm glad I'm here. You see healthy, happy kids. It makes you happy. It makes you appreciate it. Well, take care. Hope you're doing well.